Today's topic is about neutral spine, and neutral spine most of us know as neutral pelvis, neutral lower back, or neutral lumbar spine, and that's basically what we're going to be focusing on today. Obviously, in terms of neutral, there's lots of different teachings about how you find it and whether you're looking at the ASIS relative to the PSIS and whether they're above or below, or whether you look at ASIS relative to your pubic bone and above or below. So obviously with your pelvis and obviously with your pelvis here. So in terms of neutral, what does it mean? I think at the end of the day, as long as you're aware what you think it means and where you recognise you want people to be from and to, and stay consistent with that, that's great. We do get a lot of clients, definitely in our classes, who say, neutral, you want me flat, because I think that's what everyone has perceived it to be, where it's flat and it's actually the imprint. So as long as you're consistent with what you think you're talking about, if you're talking about neutral at the pelvis but you want an imprint, then state neutral pelvis, imprint lower back, or neutral lower back, tilted the pelvis, so that clients don't start to get confused. But from my intensive purposes, if I'm talking about neutral, I'm normally talking neutral through the lower back and neutral through the pelvis. So you have that sort of lazy S shape. And then on top of layering on that, it's really what can affect what's holding people in neutral. So from a neutral spine point of view, the way I generally teach it is what you've seen potentially on our neutral spine in standing and our neutral spine in supine. And what I'm looking at is pubic bone and ASIS. So I generally say to clients, put your hands on your hips, where you feel the bony points of your hips. If you put your heels of your hands on there, your middle fingers or your fingertips on your pubic bone, that's where we want either planed on a vertical angle, or if you're supine, on a horizontal angle, so that they've got something really quick and easy that they can reference, that they know that's what we're looking for. If they're lying down, then obviously you're looking at them finding their points here and working out where that is. Is their pubic bone higher, or is their pubic bone lower? And you'll generally see a lot of this arcing and what have you going on, and you really, if you are looking at pubic, you want it to be pubic rather than all of the upper back and chest. So that's a little bit of what we'll end up covering today. But yeah, from a realistic point of view, I think they're the easiest cues that I've found that clients can maybe stay consistent with. So if they're lying down, heel of the hands on the pointy bits of the hip, find your pubic bone between your legs and maybe keep that parallel to the ceiling. If they're standing up, same thing, heel of hand, pubic bone, keep that parallel to the wall. If you're in your supine or sort of prone position, then you've got that prone. Generally what they'll do is that, so they're actually in an anterior tilt, or what they'll do is really sort of tuck in and curl in, so they're in a posterior tilt. But again, if you're thinking where those 2 points are, and you're looking at like a very slight forward dip of your sacrum on there, that's where I'd cue you for pubic bone in supine, or pubic bone in quadruped. And if they're in supine, I'm going to accentuate it a little bit, they'll generally be arched back, so here. So generally what you're looking for is that they've got their pubic bone in contact, but rather that it's a pubic bone lift rather than a butt squeeze. So you really want to be a bit more sort of secure about how they're getting into those positions. More from a point of view that if they can find them, great, but especially when they're new and they're not 100% sure what is going on with their pubic bone and what is going on with everything else around it, or what is going on with how they're moving, they will really exaggerate and get quite a lot of big movement going on. Okay, so we're going to go through positioning in supine, because most of our exercises are positioning in supine, and we tend to find that a lot of our clients, especially if they've been to other people's classes or they've done Pilates at home, or they've gone to maybe a gym class, or they've been with somebody that's maybe a bit newer, a lot of them will say, oh, they keep telling me that my ribs need to be, I need to get my ribs down, and they force their ribs down. And I think it's important to work out where, if you've got your pelvis in neutral and you force the rib down, you'll end up tucking them underneath. So if I go flat here, and I'll just swap my mic side over, but if I go flat here and I'm in neutral here, if I've got a very sort of tight back, I end up with rib cages that are up here, so it might tilt me into that anterior tilt with the pelvis. So if I get my ribs down because I'm sticking up and I do this, then what we generally see is the bottom comes up. And then if we say relax through the ribs or relax through the bottom, don't clench, they can do that. So you end up with a cascade of, you either have them in that position which is flexed, or you end up in that position where they're arched. So what you want to do is, I'm not looking potentially too comfortable at the moment on the bed. So what I would want for me to happen is that I come up a little bit here so I can maintain neutral, but it takes the arch off here because my hip flexors are actually quite tight. So what's pulling me this way is tight hip flexors. So when I do this, they shorten the opposite way. And when I'm in this position, they end up pulling my rib cage up, if that makes sense. So no amount of changing here is going to change it because my hip flexors aren't in a comfortable position at all. So pretty much with most of my new clients, this is a Polestar thing, by the way, so we'll have to give credit to Polestar, is to fold up a towel in 3, pop it lengthways that way, fold up your second towel in 3, got it the wrong way, you want a T, so you want it that way and the T crossing on the top, and it gives them just that little bit of a lift. So if I then lie with my shoulders on the end of the T and my head on the top, you can see now that I've got a lot more relaxed at the top, my rib cages come down, and I can actually hold neutral quite happily. And then I can do whatever you want me to do, dead bug wise, bent knee, fall out, arm arcs. Okay, so can you see that my rib cage here is level with my hip joints, but I actually look like the mat is rested and I'm actually quite relaxed and quite comfortable. Now if I take this away, you can see now that my rib cage pops up again, and I don't look like I'm actually supported. I've relaxed through the arms, but I'm not, the bed hasn't got me. So to get my rib cage down again, I either have to come up with the head a little bit to keep here, or to put the rib cage down, I'm going to end up tucking underneath. So if you're finding that your clients are doing that, they're very likely maybe going to be tight through the hip flexors, and that way of just putting that little bit of a T underneath you, or underneath them maybe, means that that's taken the pressure off, so the top half hasn't hung down, it's staying up, but the actual hip flexors haven't changed, or the pelvis position hasn't changed. And then I can do my dead bugs or my leg slides without any of this movement going on, okay? So if you are struggling with a client just finding that and their ribs are quite high, they might actually have sticky out ribs, so they might have rib cages that are actually sticky out, so check that. But if they haven't and they are actually flat, it might just be that they're just uncomfortable and they can't maintain that position. So this is a good way to just get them to just find their neutral spine, okay? From there, your aim would be just take a little layer away from them, take the next layer away from them, so that they're ending up just with the single layer, and then if they can go there and stay maintained. Okay, so the little tip from that was do the base of your T, do the top of the T, then you've got your thorax supported, or shoulders on here, head on here. Very, very good for our postures these days, which tend to be kyphotic. So when they're lying down, they want to be kyphotic. If you let them relax, they then go the other way and arch because they just don't have the mobility. Doing something like the Thomas test that we posted last week on the hip flexors will give you an idea whether it's the hip flexors that are tight or not. But that's just something that's really quick and easy. To be honest, I automatically, any new ones that come into our studio, if I see that they're struggling and they're really struggling to find where they should be, I'll automatically just give them that. Probably not so much a pillow, because a pillow they'll just collapse into, but the towels are actually quite good. That way they're not worried about where their chest position is. And you want to just let them know, just feel that you've got, the bed has got you, that it's supported, that you've got a little bit of a gap, as if a little mouse or a little trail of ants could walk under you without you squashing them. There's a tiny little bit. And then obviously if you wanted to then work on their pelvic tilts or just gentle pelvic movement, as opposed to them doing the arch and the curl and it being a huge movement. So it's just a gently move, flatten your lower back, release it and come out. Try not to work from here. Try not to do too much so you're using your upper abs. Just bring lower pubic bone towards your belly button. Shorten that distance a little bit so you feel that your spine gently spreads and flattens onto the mat. Breathe in and let that movement just relax back to its start position. So at least they start to get an idea when we're doing things that you're using lower abs, TA, bits of oblique. We're not doing it as a big movement from glutes and hamstrings. The other thing to watch for, if you're not sure what they're doing, is that you'll see obviously the glute clench, but you'll also see if they're using their feet to do it, because what you'll see at the top end is that they'll shunt. So they're actually trying to utilise a lot of their leg muscles and hamstrings to get that movement to happen. Okay, so that's just an easy tip for supine. If you're looking at your supine sort of crook-like start position, finding neutral and how to get clients to do neutral. Quadruped tends to be a little bit interesting as well. Just a quick thought. If you're wanting clients to stay in neutral and you find that they keep imprinting, another thing I tend to use a lot is just a small face towel like this. You get them in there neutral here, and if you're finding that they just won't let go, if you put that where their waist is, where you want that small arch, and just tell them to stay that side of it. So if they're a gripper, you just tell them to let go so they stay that side of it. And again, it just might give them enough feedback or input that they go, okay, it needs to be there. And as soon as they try and grip, they feel the towel so they know if they've cheated. Whereas if you're saying, look, just lift the leg up, and they're trying to do it that way, they'll actually get some feedback from the towel. So you can say, keep your hip heavy on the bed, keep the socket there, just let the leg float. Bring it down without squashing the towel. Okay, so again, I don't really have any major issues with using a few cheats or using a few props, because as far as I'm concerned, that's a bit of biofeedback for them. They don't have the ability to know where they are in space yet. So if we can help them, or we can help them find where neutral is or where we think we want them, then that's going to help them a whole lot more. Okay, so that's your neutral in lying. In side lie, obviously from a point of view, we generally are flat on the mat, and what we'll generally see is this, that they sag or that they roll backwards. So I do the same. I just give them a rolled up towel under their waist so that they can maintain their neutral position. Then their hips stay stacked on top of each other. So if you're doing things like your clams, or you're doing things like your side-lying legs, or you're doing long lever side-lying legs, they're not worried about that position. I tend to avoid, or tend to advocate not this, because as soon as they're upright, they're in side flexion. As soon as they're in side flexion, you've lost neutral because they're hip hitched. So you really want them to be flat and let arm, body and hip away. And certainly if they're doing the double leg, you want to be cueing that top leg a little bit longer than you think it is. So again, enough that a little mouse or a trail of ants could go under the side waist, not that their weight's on the top of the pelvic bone. So what we're looking at when you're in a side lying position is that you want the weight distributed evenly. You don't want the weight on the top of that hip there, because you can see the whole position is changed. You want it here. So if I turn the spine around again, if your weight sits here, you can see you end up with side flexion of these joints, stretching of these joints, and you lose neutral. And it doesn't give you glutes either, so it doesn't give you access to glute med. You end up using something else. So you want to be pushing them away and making sure the weight is even through the whole side, not just the top angle of that hip. Okay, I'll just turn myself around. So if I'm like this, you can see I'm in a big side bend, and I want to be here. And if I'm up like this, I get that big side bend. If I put my pillow under here, then I get my movement and I'm in that better stacked position of the pin, so as if the hips have been pinned down and stacked one on top of the other. So if you're looking at side line and trying to find neutral, that's your best bet. And they're really, like I'm not, you probably realised I'm not a purist. I think at the end of the day we're here for our clients, and we're here for how to get the best out of our clients. And if we can't do that, and we can't correct them, and we can't give them the tools because it has to be this way, that's obviously some people teach that way and that's their method. I think from my point of view, you know, we're not all dancers, we're not all gymnasts, we don't all have fabulous coordination and balance and motor control, and some of us just need that little bit of help to work out where we should be in space. The only other thing we were going to do was prone. I don't know, I keep throwing this on the floor, but prone wise, similar position. If you have a client who just stays here and you're trying to get them to do something and they're pulling there all the time, or you're trying to get them to do that and they're gripping, you can just give them a little bit of support under the pubic bone so that you flatten them out already, or they might need it a little bit more under their tummy, so they lengthen through here, so they've got their pubic bone in contact and their ASIS is a little bit higher, so that relatively, instead of them sitting that way, you've given them a little bit of lift under the ASIS, so it allows them to go down. So anterior superior iliac spine is what I'm referring to with ASIS, and it gives them that length through here, so that when they then lift, if for any reason they lose it into extension, so if I lift my leg up and I'm doing that instead, so I end up doing that, or I end up doing it that way, if I've got the pillow or support here, because I'm then in relative lumbar flexion, if I lift, it's only if I get to there that I then start to cheat. I can get to there before I start hinging into lumbar extension. So again, I don't see the problem in just using that to help your clients stay neutral. Once they've worked out what muscle it is you want them to use, once they've worked out, it's not that hard and you can get that muscle there, then you can obviously say, feel what that felt like, feel how long your lower back felt. So when you're in that position, instead of your lower back feeling that it was all scrunched up, feel that you felt that there was a bit of space underneath there. So when you lift the leg, you've reached long. Stay in that position. Imagine there's a strawberry under your belly. Lift the leg long without hinging forward. And then you're obviously educating them into neutral in prone. And then that follows through from neutral in prone to neutral in your quadruped position. Because most will be like that. They'll just hang, or they'll go the opposite way completely and they'll flex. Okay? So as long as you've got your upper body set up and your lower body set up, I generally teach them weight bear on the tibia rather than hip completely over the knee, because they're weight bearing on their kneecap then. Just weight bear on the tibia, and then with your pelvis, you're looking at flexion and extension, or posterior tilt, anterior tilt, and again you're looking at that point, neutral and beyond. So I haven't really worn the best top and the best clothes today to be doing this. However, what we'll generally see is that they can get neutral through the pelvis, but then they hang through the rib cage, so you'll see their ribs popping out. So what you want is that lift through here without the tuck in. Okay, so I'm thinking of my two sit bones facing backwards and they're nice and wide. I'm thinking that my pelvis is parallel to the floor from my ASAS and my pubic bone. There's a little bit of a dip downwards where my sacrum is at a slight angle downwards, but I then don't want my rib cage to hang. I want my rib cage to stay connected to here without it causing me to pull in. Okay, so that's where we tend to lose a lot of people in neutral, is that we could do that and they go outwards, or we tell them to pull up and they go inwards. And what we're after is get their neutral ready first, and then just give them a gentle lift up, or tell them from here, have some energy through the hands so they feel that they've got that connection then. So there's a small set of braces, rib cage to here. You want to maintain that position. It shouldn't shorten, it shouldn't lengthen. Okay? So they're your sort of four different cues that I think you could probably use for sitting supine, prone, quadruped, side lying, because that's obviously a lot of where the actual work that you're going to be doing is going to be needed. So clients need to know, can they find neutral? And if you're saying neutral pelvis and neutral lower back, or neutral pelvis with a slight imprint lower back, or imprint lower back with posterior tilted pelvis because you've brought in a little bit of an imprint curve. But yeah, I really wouldn't worry too much from a point of view if they're new about them getting it correct and perfect, because if you're too perfect, you're making it too hard for them where they're then afraid to move because they won't move. I think from an experience, like in my experience, it's easier to say, look, this is the idea of where I want you to be. Get the idea of how your pelvis moves, get the idea of where it is in space, and then we can teach them where you want them to be. So the one thing we didn't do was sitting actually. So from a sitting point of view, I'll actually straddle the bed this way on. What I generally say is put your sit bones underneath. When you're going into posterior tilt, you'll feel that your sit bones roll off your hands. You'll feel your sit bones poke into your hand, and then you'll feel your sit bone roll behind your hand. So what's happening is they're here. That's me in neutral. As I roll backwards, the sit bone rolls off my hand forwards. As I come up into neutral, you should feel that the bone is directly on top, and as I come into an anterior tilt, you'll feel the sit bone slip behind. So if you're struggling with somebody to work out where they are in sitting, that's probably a good way to go, because again, especially if you use things like the chair, what we tend to see is that a lot, or they do that a lot. So they're not actually in neutral at the pelvis. What they are is hinging from the upper back, or they're in flexion and they sit up from here as opposed to being in neutral and sitting up on top. They'll then brace or they'll curl. Okay, so hands under the sit bones, feel where your sit bones are. As you curl forward, you'll feel your sit bones slide forward off your fingers. As you sit up, you'll see your sit bones sit nicely on top of your fingers, and as you rock forward, you'll feel your sit bones rock backwards off your hand. So, and again, it's a nice way for clients to be able to feel what's going on with the sitting position as well. So we'll have our Facebook Live will be on Monday. Hopefully we'll have a better internet connection. If you have any questions on neutral spine, then feel free. If you're watching this at a later date and you want to flick a question, just pop it in our Facebook group and I'll hopefully answer that question for you. But that is my interpretation of neutral. Okay, so from a neutral point of view, it is the optimum position of being able to load the body. It's the optimum position where the tissues aren't stressed into flexion extension. Remember, you have an anterior longitudinal ligament and a posterior longitudinal ligament, so it runs the whole length of the spine at the front and the back. When we're in extension, we're stressing the anterior ligament. When we're in flexion, we're stressing the posterior ligament. And if we're consistently in flexion, like the postures of today, it's very hard then to extend because of all those anterior structures like your hip flexors get short. Same thing if you know there's a lot of people who then stay in extension. To be honest, I don't know that many who are in extension and they struggle to flex. They might certainly struggle to flex through their lower back and unable to do it that way. They'll have that tightness through their structure. So there's lots of different overlaying things that can then affect how your body moves and how you get that movement through pelvis and how you get that movement through the hip. If you're not able to get true pelvis movement, you'll find that you don't actually have true disassociation movement through the hips. So if you've got somebody that doesn't have true neutral, they might not flex neutrally through the hip. What you'll find is they actually sit shallow and they end up doing this. So what you're getting is a tilt of the pelvis as opposed to true hip bend. That's the topic for another day. All right, neutral spine, neutral pelvis, neutral body. We'll see you next week with another topic. Thanks for watching.